The silence in the private dining room was worth $1 billion, and Julian Thorne was losing it by the second. Across the table, Lorenzo Vescovi, an Italian patriarch with eyes that held the history of the Medici, smiled a placid, dismissive smile. He'd just spoken for a full minute in lyrical, untranslatable Italian, and Thorne's entire team of Ivy League prodigies could only stare back with the dumbfounded panic of sheep facing a wolf. The cutting-edge translation app on the table was dead. The deal of the decade, Thorne's crowning achievement, was collapsing into a farcical display of American ignorance. Thorne's knuckles were white, his jaw was a knot of pure fury, and he was about to unleash hell on his incompetent staff. He didn't notice the waitress, the one who had been silently refilling their water pours behind him. He didn't see the flicker of understanding in her eyes. He was just about to stand to end it all, when a soft, clear voice cut through the tension, speaking Italian not just fluently, but with the specific lilting accent of the Lake Como hills. A voice that belonged to the waitress. Julian Thorne did not tolerate failure. It was an allergy, a visceral rejection of an outcome he had systematically purged from his life since he'd clawed his way out of a destitute childhood in Queens. Failure was for other people. It was for the weak, the unprepared, the unfortunate souls who littered the path to his vertiginous success. Yet here it was, sitting opposite him, personified by an old man in an impeccably tailored suit, smiling placidly, as Thorne's empire teetered on the brink of a multi-billion-dollar humiliation. The setting was Ethelgard, a restaurant so ferociously exclusive that its address was unlisted. Securing a reservation required a background check and a referral from a current patron. Julian had bought out the entire establishment for the evening. The air in the private Emperor's Suite was thick with the scent of white truffles and wasted money. Sunlight, muted by the smoked glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows, cast long, judgmental shadows across the vast mahogany table. Across from him sat Lorenzo Vescovi. He was the 75-year-old owner of Vescovi Tessuti, a family-owned textile company that had been weaving the world's most coveted silks and brocades since the Renaissance. Their fabrics were legendary, adorning royal courts, haute couture runways, and the private jets of the global elite. Thorne didn't care about the fabric. He cared about the brand, the legacy, the impenetrable moat of prestige that came with it. Acquiring Vescovi Tessuti was not just a business transaction, it was an ascension. It would cement Thorne Industries as a dynasty. The problem, the single insurmountable roadblock, was that Lorenzo Vescovi refused to speak a word of English. It was a power play, and a brilliant one. Vescovi had arrived from his villa on Lake Como with a single ancient-looking leather briefcase and an air of aristocratic indifference. He had insisted on this final meeting being in person in New York on Thorne's turf, but he had brought his own atmosphere with him, one of unhurried old-world tradition that was antithetical to Thorne's slash-and-burn corporate ethos. Marcus Thorne's voice was a low growl, a promise of violence that made his chief of acquisitions, Marcus Finch, flinch. "What is the status of our solution, Marcus?" A man whose tailored suit couldn't hide the desperation radiating from his pores, frantically tapped at the state-of-the-art translation device sitting uselessly on the table. "I don't understand, Mr. Thorne. The network is down. The entire block. We checked. It's a citywide outage. The backup is routed through the same system. We're completely cut off." Thorne's gaze, the color of a stormy Atlantic, didn't leave Vescovi's face. The old man had just finished a lengthy, eloquent monologue. His hands had moved with the grace of a conductor, weaving a story or an insult or a recipe for all Thorne knew. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the frantic, useless tapping of Marcus's manicured fingernails. "So let me get this straight," Thorne said, his voice dangerously soft. I am poised to complete the largest luxury brand acquisition in a decade. I have flown Signore Vescovi here on my jet. I have booked out a restaurant that costs more per hour than your yearly salary. And you are telling me that our entire communication strategy rests on an app that can be taken down by a construction worker hitting the wrong cable 2 blocks away. We had contingencies. Marcus stammered, his face paling. We had a remote interpreter on standby, who we can't reach because the network is down. Thorne finished for him. The sentence, a blade. He looked at the 2 other VPs at the table, both of whom suddenly found the grain of the mahogany intensely fascinating. And not one of you, not a single person on a team of 20 that worked on this deal for 6 months, a team of people with degrees from Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, thought to have a living, breathing human being who speaks Italian in this room as a failsafe. The silence was their answer. It was a symphony of incompetence, and Julian Thorne was its unwilling conductor. Vescovi sighed, a theatrical sound of disappointment. He spoke again, his tone gentle, but laced with what could only be condescension. He gestured towards the door, then at his watch. The meaning was clear. This farce was over. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Thorne's rage. He couldn't let it end like this. He had bested titans of industry, outmaneuvered corporate raiders, and bent governments to his will. He would not be defeated by a language barrier. Get someone on a landline, he snapped at Marcus. Find an interpreter. I don't care if you have to drag the Italian ambassador out of a state dinner. You have 5 minutes before I personally escort all of you to the unemployment line. As Marcus scrambled, fumbling with his phone to find a signal, Thorne leaned forward, trying to communicate through sheer force of will. He smiled, a tight, predatory baring of teeth. "Signore Vescovi," he said, slowly, loudly, as if the man were deaf, not foreign. "Patience. A small technical issue." Vescovi simply raised a silver eyebrow, his expression one of faint amusement. He was enjoying this. He was testing Thorne, testing his preparedness, his grace under pressure, and Thorne was failing spectacularly. It was in this moment of supreme tension, as Thorne's carefully constructed world was fraying at the edges, that the waitress moved. Her name was Isabella, and for the past hour, she had been a ghost. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long hours and aching feet, refilling water glasses, clearing plates completely invisible. She was dressed in the restaurant's stark black uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. There was nothing remarkable about her, except, perhaps, for the quiet watchfulness in her dark eyes. She had been clearing the bread basket near Thorne's elbow when Vescovi had made his final dismissive pronouncement. She had paused for just a beat, her hand hovering over the porcelain dish. Thorne, consumed by his fury, hadn't noticed, but she had heard, and she had understood. As Marcus Finch babbled incoherently into his phone about finding a professor at Columbia, and Vescovi began to push his chair back from the table, Isabella stepped forward. She placed the bread basket on a nearby credenza, straightened her uniform jacket, and faced Lorenzo Vescovi. "Lord Bishop," she began, her voice soft but clear, carrying across the silent room. "Please forgive them. Technology sometimes betrays us all. But the intention behind the meeting is sincere." The world stopped. Marcus's phone call died in his throat. The other VPs looked up, their jaws slack. Julian Thorne froze, his body rigid with shock. It wasn't just that she was speaking Italian. It was how she was speaking it. It wasn't the textbook Italian of a language course. It was fluid, natural, imbued with a specific regional melody. The cadence was unmistakably Lombard, the accent honed by the waters of Lake Como itself. Lorenzo Vescovi's head snapped towards her. His amused, condescending mask fell away, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated astonishment. He stared at the waitress as if she were an apparition. He leaned forward, his old eyes narrowing. How do you know my dialect?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. The waitress Isabella met his gaze without flinching. A flicker of something sadness, memory defiance, passed through her eyes before she answered in the same perfect Italian. "They are the words I learned from my grandfather, sir. He came from Bellagio, a town a stone's throw from Vescovi's own ancestral home. The air in the room crackled. The $1 billion deal was forgotten. The failed technology was forgotten. All that existed was the stunned silence of the American executives, the utter shock on the face of the Italian patriarch, and the waitress who had just changed the entire game with a few simple words in her grandfather's tongue. Julian Thorne stared at her, his mind racing. He wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at a lifeline. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the Emperor's suite was the faint hum of the climate control system. Julian Thorne's mind, a machine calibrated for rapid calculation and ruthless opportunism, was processing the new reality. The woman standing before him, the one he had barely registered as human until now, was not just a speaker of Italian. She was a key. She was the Rosetta Stone he desperately needed. Lorenzo Vescovi leaned back in his chair, his eyes, which had been dismissive moments before, now sharp with genuine curiosity. He studied Isabella not as a member of the serving staff, but as a person of interest. He fired off another question in their shared, intimate dialect, a rapid-fire query about her family name, her history. Isabella answered calmly, her voice steady despite the weight of every eye in the room. She gave her name, Isabella Rossi. She spoke of her grandfather, a craftsman, she said vaguely, who had left Italy many years ago. Each word she spoke seemed to build a fragile, invisible bridge between herself and the old tycoon. She was not merely translating. She was communicating, using shared cultural shorthand that no app or professional interpreter could ever replicate. Thorne watched the exchange, a predator sensing a shift in the wind. His rage had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. He saw the path forward. He didn't care who she was, where she came from, or what her story was. He only cared about what she could do for him, right here, right now. He held up a hand, a gesture of command that cut through the Italian conversation. "That's enough." Isabella stopped her gaze, shifting to him. Her expression was neutral professional, but her dark eyes were wary. Vescovi looked at Thorne, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face at the interruption. Thorne stood up his 6'2" frame, commanding the space. He ignored his own team, who were still gawking in disbelief. He walked around the table and stood directly in front of Isabella. He looked down at her, his eyes boring into hers. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low and direct. "Isabella Rossi, sir." "Isabella," he repeated, testing the name. "You work for this restaurant?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "For how much longer?" She blinked, confused. I don't understand. It's a simple question," Thorne said, his voice devoid of warmth. "As of this second, you no longer work for Ethelgard. You work for me. I will pay this restaurant whatever it takes to cover your immediate departure. I will pay you 10 times what you make in a year here for 1 week of your time. You will sit at this table and you will translate for me. You will not just say the words. You will tell me what he means. You will tell me if he is lying, if he is mocking me, if he is sincere. You will be my voice, and you will be my ears. Is that understood?" The audacity of the offer hung in the air. Marcus Finch made a small choking sound. This was insane, plucking a waitress out of obscurity, and placing her in the center of a multi-billion-dollar negotiation was beyond unorthodox. It was corporate madness. Isabella stared at Julian Thorne. She saw the raw, unvarnished ambition in his eyes, the complete disregard for protocol, the sheer force of a will that bent the world to its shape. She had served men like him before, men who saw people as instruments, as tools to be used and discarded. But she also saw the desperation simmering just beneath the surface. And in that desperation, she saw an opportunity. Not just for money, though. God knew she needed it. But for something more. Her life was a grueling cycle of long shifts, aching feet, and the constant gnawing worry over the mounting medical bills for her younger sister's care. Her dreams of studying art history, of reconnecting with the culture her grandfather had spoken of with such love and sorrow, had long been shelved in the face of harsh reality. This man, this cold, powerful man, was offering her a way out, albeit a dangerous and unpredictable one. She looked over at Lorenzo Vescovi. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. He had recognized her dialect, her heritage. For the first time in a long time, someone saw her as more than just a uniform. She took a deep breath, her decision made. She looked back at Thorne, her chin held a little higher. "I have 2 conditions," she said, her voice clear and firm. Thorne's eyebrows shot up. No one gave him conditions. You're in no position to bargain. Then you're in no position to understand, Signore Vescovi, she countered smoothly. The room fell silent again. Marcus looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. Isabella had just talked back to Julian Thorne. Instead of exploding, a slow, predatory smile spread across Thorne's face. He respected strength. He had misjudged her. She wasn't just a key. She had a spine. "Go on," he said, intrigued. First, Isabella said, "You will treat Signore Vescovi with respect. You will not interrupt him. You will listen not just to his words, but to his concerns. His company is his family's legacy. If you treat this like just another asset to be stripped, you will lose. I will not be a party to that disrespect." Thorne's smile faded, but he nodded slowly. "And second, my pay for the week is not 10 times my salary. It's a flat fee. $250,000, transferred to my account by morning." A gasp escaped from one of the VPs. It was an astronomical sum for a week's work, an amount that would take her decades to earn at the restaurant. Thorne didn't even blink. He saw it for what it was, isn't just greed, but a price for her dignity, a statement of her value. She knew what she was worth to him in this moment, and she was cashing in. He respected that even more. "Done," he said, without hesitation. He turned to Marcus. "Marcus, handle the restaurant. Pay them for a month of lost revenue if you have to. And get our new consultant's bank details. Make the transfer. Now." He gestured to the empty chair beside him, a chair that had been intended for a high-powered legal counsel. "Isabella, please, join us." Isabella unclipped the small name tag from her uniform and placed it on the credenza. She smoothed down her simple black dress, which suddenly seemed entirely out of place in this world of bespoke suits. She walked to the table and sat down, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was no longer the waitress. She was the most important person in the room. She turned to Lorenzo Vescovi and spoke in their shared tongue. "Signore Vescovi, my apologies for the interruption. My new employer is direct. But he is prepared to listen now. With your permission, shall we begin again?" Vescovi looked from Isabella to Thorne and back again. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. The test was over. The real negotiation was about to begin. And against all odds, the billionaire CEO and the immigrant waitress were now on the same side. The transformation was instantaneous and jarring. One moment, Isabella Rossi was calculating how to stretch her tips to cover next month's rent and the ever-present pharmacy bills. The next, she was being ushered out of Ethelgard's service exit and into the buttery leather interior of Julian Thorne's waiting Maybach. The door closed with a silent, definitive thud, sealing off her old life. The car moved through the glittering canyons of Manhattan, a silent, luxurious bubble gliding through a world that had always been on the other side of a window for her. Thorne sat opposite, not speaking, his face illuminated by the glow of his smartphone as he fired off a volley of terse emails. Marcus Finch relegated to the front seat, with the driver kept stealing nervous glances at her in the rearview mirror, his expression a cocktail of resentment and disbelief. They didn't go to an office. They went to the Four Seasons. A penthouse suite had been arranged, a sprawling space of muted colors, modern art, and breathtaking views of Central Park. "You'll stay here," Thorne announced, striding into the suite as if he owned it, which he very well might have. "A team will be here in an hour with a wardrobe. Give them your sizes. Another team will be here with files. Read them, all of them. I want you to understand every facet of this deal by sunrise. My private number. Don't lose it. Don't share it. Don't call it unless it's a matter of life or death. We reconvene with Vescovi tomorrow at 10. He handed her a slim black business card, his name embossed in simple silver lettering. And then, with a final appraising look, he was gone, leaving her alone in the cavernous silence of the suite. Isabella walked over to the window, drawn by the tapestry of lights below. It was a god's-eye view of the city she had only ever known, from the ground up, rushing from the subway to the restaurant, her head down, her focus narrowed to survival. Up here, the city was a jewel, beautiful and silent. It felt like another planet. She sank onto a sofa that cost more than her car, her mind reeling. The $250,000. It was an impossible, life-altering sum. It meant her sister Sophia could have the best care, the experimental treatments they had only ever read about, with a sense of hopeless longing. It was freedom from a fear that had been her constant companion for years. The promised teams arrived with military precision. First a stylist, a chic woman named Catherine, who looked at Isabella's simple black dress and worn-out flats with a polite, professional pity. For the next 2 hours, the suite was filled with racks of designer clothes, Armani suits, Max Mara, coats, silk blouses from Loro Piana. They were clothes designed for boardrooms and power lunches, a uniform for a life she had never imagined. As she stood in front of a full-length mirror, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue pantsuit, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The tired waitress was gone, replaced by a stranger who looked poised, elegant, and powerful. Next came the files. A young, earnest paralegal arrived with 3 heavy briefcases, filled with documents detailing every aspect of the Vescovi Tessuti acquisition: financial projections, market analysis, brand synergy reports, legal frameworks. For the rest of the night, fueled by room service coffee and a sense of surreal determination, Isabella immersed herself in the cold, hard language of Julian Thorne's world. She was a quick study, her mind accustomed to memorizing complex orders and navigating the subtle social cues of demanding diners, absorbed the information readily. But as she read, a disquieting feeling grew. The reports spoke of leveraging heritage, optimizing production, and streamlining artisanal processes. It was the language of efficiency, of profit maximization. It spoke of Vescovi Tessuti as a collection of assets, a brand to be exploited. There was no mention of the people, the weavers whose families had worked the looms for generations. There was no soul. The next morning, when she met Thorne in the lobby, he gave her a single approving nod. "You look the part," he said, his eyes scanning her new attire. "Did you do the reading I did?" she said. "And I have some thoughts. I don't pay you for your thoughts." He cut her off, his tone sharp, as he led her to the waiting car. "I pay you to be a conduit. Nothing more." The meeting took place at Thorn Industries headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper of glass and steel that pierced the sky over downtown. This time the atmosphere was different. Vescovi was no longer testing them. He was engaged, curious, and his entire focus was on Isabella. As the meeting began, Isabella proved her worth tenfold. When Thorn's team presented a slide deck on increasing factory output, Vescovi responded with a long, impassioned speech about the master weavers and the time-honored traditions that could not be rushed. A lesser interpreter would have given a literal translation. Isabella did more. Signore Vescovi says she began turning to Thorn, that the soul of his company is not in its output, but in the hands of its masters. He's not just talking about quality control, Mr. Thorn. He's telling you that the weavers are not factory workers, they are artists. He fears that your plans for optimization will turn his life's work into just another sweatshop producing soulless luxury goods. He is asking if you are a merchant or if you understand art. Thorn stared at her, then at Vescovi. He had been about to argue to bring up profit margins and shareholder value, but Isabella's translation gave him pause. It wasn't just a translation, it was a strategic briefing. He changed his tack. "Tell him," Thorn said to Isabella, "that I understand. Tell him the story of my father, a carpenter. He built furniture, not for a lot of money, but he taught me that the quality of a thing is in the unseen details, the joinery, the grain of the wood. Tell him I am not a merchant. I am a builder, and I don't buy things to destroy them. I buy them to build them even stronger." Isabella translated his words, infusing them with a sincerity that Thorn himself struggled to project. She saw a flicker of genuine respect in Vescovi's eyes. A connection had been made. But as the day wore on, the friction between Isabella and Thorn's team, particularly Marcus Finch, grew. Marcus saw her as an interloper, a freakish anomaly who had usurped his role. During a break, he cornered her by the coffee machine. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he sneered, his voice low. "Playing the corporate big shot. Don't get too comfortable. He gets what he wants, and then people like you disappear. Just a footnote. I'm just trying to help this deal." "Succeed, Marcus," Isabella replied coolly, not letting him see how his words stung. "Shouldn't you be doing the same? I know who you are," he hissed, stepping closer. "I ran a background check. Isabella Rossi, a waitress from Queens, parents deceased, a mountain of debt for a sick sister. You're a nobody. Don't for a second think you're one of us." The mention of her sister was a low blow. Isabella felt a flash of hot anger, but she suppressed it. She looked him dead in the eye. "You're right, Marcus. I'm not one of you. I don't have an Ivy League degree. But I know something you don't. I know what it means to build something with your hands and protect it with your life. And that's a language Vescovi understands far better than your spreadsheets." She walked away, leaving him seething. But his words had planted a seed of doubt. Was he right? Was she just a temporary tool, a curiosity to be discarded once the contract was signed? The thought was a cold knot in her stomach. She was in their world, wearing their clothes, but she did not belong. She was still Isabella Rossi from Queens, and she was beginning to suspect that in this glittering, ruthless world, that was a very dangerous thing to be. The negotiations stretched into a third day, evolving into a complex dance of finance, culture, and ego. Isabella was no longer just a translator. She had become the choreographer. She would listen to Vescovi's long anecdotal stories about his father's first loom or the specific shade of silk inspired by a Como sunset, and she would distill them for Thorne not as nostalgic ramblings, but as key negotiating points. He's not talking about the color, he's talking about intellectual property, she would explain. He's telling you that the inspiration, the very essence of the region, is part of the company's value. Thorne, to his credit, listened. He began to see the deal not as a simple acquisition, but as the absorption of a living history. He found himself growing fascinated by the world Isabella was revealing, a world where legacy was more valuable than currency. He started asking her questions in the car, not just about the deal, but about the culture, the people, the meaning behind the old man's words. A fragile professional trust was forming between the billionaire and the waitress, a bond forged in the crucible of high-stakes negotiation. Isabella, in turn, was navigating the treacherous currents of her new role. She built a genuine rapport with Lorenzo Vescovi. During breaks, he would ask her about her grandfather, the man from Bellagio. Hesitantly at first, then with growing warmth, she shared her memories, the smell of wood shavings in his small workshop, the sound of his sad, beautiful songs, in a language she barely understood. Back then, the faded photograph he kept of a house by the lake. Rossi Vescovi would murmur, tasting the name. I knew some Rossis in Bellagio. A long time ago, they were carpenters known for their intricate inlay work. A chill went down Isabella's spine, but she kept her expression neutral. He was a craftsman, she would reply vaguely, steering the conversation back to safer topics. The truth felt like a dangerous weight in her chest. Her grandfather, Giovanni Rossi, had been more than a craftsman. He had been a designer of genius, a creator of unique textile patterns, a rival to the burgeoning Vescovi empire. A story of betrayal and ruin was the unspoken legacy of her family name, a ghost she had carried with her all her life. She told herself it was ancient history, that it had no bearing on this deal. She was here to do a job to secure her sister's future. The past had to remain buried. But the past rarely stays buried, especially when someone is digging for it. Marcus Finch was a man drowning, and he was looking for a life raft. He had been publicly humiliated, sidelined by a waitress who now commanded more of Julian Thorne's respect than he, the chief of acquisitions, did. His jealousy had curdled into a venomous obsession. He was convinced Isabella was a fraud, a con artist who had somehow orchestrated this entire situation. While Thorne saw a lifeline, Marcus saw a threat that had to be neutralized. He had already run a basic background check. Now he went deeper. He hired a private investigator in Italy, a discreet firm in Milan that specialized in digging up the skeletons in the closets of the wealthy. He gave them a name, Isabella Rossi, and a connection, a grandfather from Bellagio, Giovanni Rossi. He told them to look for any link, no matter how tenuous, to the Vescovi family. The report came back on the evening of the fourth day, delivered in a digitally encrypted file. Marcus opened it in the sterile quiet of his office, the city lights twinkling obliviously outside. As he read, a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. It was better than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a link. It was a bombshell. The report detailed the history of two families in post-war Bellagio, the Vescovis and the Rossis. In the beginning, they were friends and collaborators. Lorenzo Vescovi's father, Antonio, was the businessman, the one with the ambition to build an empire. Isabella's grandfather, Giovanni Rossi, was the artist, the visionary who created the intricate, revolutionary patterns that set their fabrics apart. They were partners, though nothing was ever put on paper. Then came the betrayal. In 1958, Antonio Vescovi secured a massive company-making contract from a Parisian fashion house. The contract was for a series of designs that were Giovanni Rossi's masterpieces. On the eve of the signing, Antonio forced Giovanni out, claiming the designs as his own creation. He used a legal loophole and his considerable influence to silence Giovanni, who was left with nothing. The Rossi family, once respected artisans, fell into poverty and disgrace. Giovanni, broken-hearted and betrayed, eventually immigrated to America with his family, the story of his stolen legacy becoming a whispered, bitter fairy tale passed down to his children and grandchildren. The foundation of Vescovi Tessuti, the very patterns that had launched the empire, belonged to Isabella's grandfather. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. This was it. This was the weapon he needed. He could frame Isabella as a vengeful saboteur, a plant who had maneuvered her way into the negotiation to destroy the deal from the inside as payback for her family's ruin. It was perfect. It explained her sudden appearance, her flawless dialect, her rapport with Vescovi. It was all a long con. He printed the key pages of the report, his hands trembling with adrenaline. He strode out of his office, his purpose clear. He would not go to legal or HR. He would go directly to the top. He would go to Thorne. He found Thorne in his penthouse office, staring out at the city skyline. The final terms of the deal were being drawn up. Victory was within his grasp. Julian Marcus said, his voice tight with feigned urgency. "We have a problem, a big one. It's Isabella." Thorne turned slowly, his eyes narrowed. "What about her?" Marcus laid the papers on the polished desk. "She's not who she says she is. Or rather, she's much more than she's been letting on. Her name isn't just Rossi. Her grandfather wasn't just some craftsman from Bellagio." He pointed to a paragraph in the investigator's report. Her grandfather was Giovanni Rossi. He was Antonio Vescovi's original partner. According to this, Antonio Vescovi built his entire company on patterns he stole from Isabella's grandfather, ruining him in the process. Thorne picked up the papers, his face unreadable, as he scanned the damning words. The silence in the office stretched thick and heavy. Marcus watched him, his victory assured. He had exposed the viper in their midst. He had saved the day. Thorne finished reading. He placed the papers down on the desk with deliberate care. He looked not at the papers, but at Marcus. His expression wasn't one of gratitude or relief. It was one of stone-cold fury. "And you're bringing this to me now," Thorne's voice was dangerously quiet. Marcus faltered. I just found out. I thought you needed to know. She's been playing you, Julian. Playing all of us. This is about revenge. She's going to sabotage the deal at the last minute." Thorne walked slowly around the desk until he was standing directly in front of Marcus. He was a good foot taller, and at that moment he seemed to block out the light. "Let me tell you what I think," Marcus Thorne said, his voice a low growl. "I think you've been so blinded by your own pathetic jealousy that you've nearly blown this entire deal. You didn't bring this to me to protect the company. You brought it to me to destroy her. You don't have a shred of proof that she has a hidden agenda. All you have is a 70-year-old family tragedy that she might not even fully know about." Thorne's eyes were chips of ice. "But you've put the poison in the well. Now I have to act on this information. Now I have to confront her. You've taken my most valuable asset in this negotiation and turned her into a liability." He picked up his phone. "Get her up here." Marcus stood frozen as Thorne's assistant made the call. The triumphant smile had vanished, replaced by a dawning horror. He hadn't saved the day. He had just lit a fuse. The ghost of Bellagio had been summoned, and its arrival was about to unleash a storm that could destroy everything. Isabella arrived at the penthouse office 10 minutes later. She had been in her hotel room reviewing the final draft of the agreement, a sense of weary pride settling over her. She had done it. She had navigated this impossible world, secured her sister's future, and helped forge a deal that she hoped would honor both legacy and progress. She walked into Thorne's office with a tentative smile, expecting to discuss the final clauses. The smile died on her lips the moment she saw the atmosphere. Thorne was standing by the window, his back to her, a rigid silhouette against the city lights. Marcus Finch was standing near the desk, looking pale and triumphant, a vulture waiting for the kill. The air was frigid with unspoken tension. "You wanted to see me?" Mr. Thorne, Isabella asked, her voice cautious. Thorne turned around. His face was a mask of cold fury, an expression she hadn't seen since that first disastrous lunch at Ethelgard. He said nothing, simply gesturing to the papers Marcus had placed on his desk. Confused, Isabella stepped forward and picked them up. Her eyes scanned the first page, a summary from a private investigator in Milan. Her breath caught in her throat. She saw the names Giovanni Rossi, Antonio Vescovi. She saw the words stolen designs, partnership dispute, financial ruin. It was her family's secret history, the source of her grandfather's profound sadness, laid bare in the cold, transactional language of a corporate investigation. She looked up from the papers, her heart pounding. Her gaze met Thorne's, and what she saw there made her feel sick. It was a look of utter betrayal. "A waitress," Thorne said, his voice dripping with contempt. "That's what you told me you were. Just a waitress from Queens who happened to know a little Italian." "That is what I am," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Don't lie to me," he thundered, taking a step forward. "Don't you dare lie to me." "You knew. From the moment you heard his name, you knew exactly who Lorenzo Vescovi was. This was never a coincidence." "No, She started, but he cut her off. "This entire thing has been a setup, hasn't it? A brilliant long-game revenge plot. Get close to the deal, become indispensable, and then what? Sabotage it at the final hour, demand a cut. What was the end game? Isabella," the accusation hung in the air, ugly and poisonous. Behind Thorne, Marcus watched with a smug, vindicated expression. Isabella felt a wave of dizziness. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Her family's pain, her private history, had been twisted into a weapon and was now being used against her. "That's not true," she said, finding a sliver of strength. "I didn't know the connection until I heard Signore Vescovi speak of Bellagio. I didn't know for sure until he mentioned my family name. Yes, I knew the story. It's the story of my family's hardship. But I swear to you I never intended to use it for anything." "Oh, I believe you needed the money," Thorne sneered. Finch's report was very thorough on that point. "Your sister? The medical bills? It's all very touching. A perfect cover story. The desperate woman just trying to survive. How much was Vescovi paying you on the side to feed you information?" The cruelty of his words was like a physical blow. He was taking her most vulnerable point, her love for her sister, and twisting it into proof of her deceit. Tears welled in her eyes, hot with anger and humiliation. Nothing she said, her voice shaking with rage. "He paid me nothing. I have done everything in my power to make this deal happen, to bridge the gap between your world and his. I have respected his legacy while fighting for your interests. I have done nothing but help you." "You have helped yourself," Marcus interjected, unable to resist his moment of triumph. "You got your $250,000. I bet that was just the down payment." Isabella whirled on him. "You did this?" she said, her voice low and fierce. "You couldn't stand that I was succeeding where you failed, so you dug into my past to destroy me. I did it to protect the company from a liar." Marcus shot back. Enough. Thorne's voice cracked like a whip. He was pacing now, a caged tiger. The paranoia that was never far from the surface in his world, a world of backstabbing rivals and corporate espionage, had taken complete control. He trusted no one. He saw conspiracies in every shadow, and Isabella, the miraculous savior, had just become the ultimate Trojan horse. "I took a risk on you," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl as he stopped in front of her. "I brought you into my inner circle. I trusted you. And you were playing me from the very beginning." "I wasn't," she pleaded, the tears finally spilling over, tracing hot tracks down her cheeks. "Mr. Thorne Julian, please. The story is true. My grandfather was betrayed. But I am not my grandfather. I am not seeking revenge. All I wanted was to provide for my family." But he wasn't listening. He couldn't see the desperate sincerity in her eyes. He could only see the data points of betrayal laid out in the report, the motive, the opportunity, the lie of omission. In his black and white world, it was an open and shut case. "The deal closes tomorrow morning," he said, his voice flat and dead, devoid of all emotion. "Your services are no longer required. Marcus will have a professional interpreter here at 9 a.m. sharp." He turned to Marcus. "Escort Ms. Rossi out of the building. Her access card is revoked. The hotel suite will be cancelled. Have a car take her back to wherever she came from." The dismissal was brutal, absolute. She was being cast out, erased. "The money—" Isabella started thinking of her sister. "The money is yours," Thorne said with a dismissive wave. "Consider it a fee for the lesson you've taught me. Never trust anyone." Marcus stepped forward, a triumphant smirk on his face. "This way, Isabella." She looked one last time at Julian Thorne's back. He was already facing the window again, as if she had already ceased to exist. The man she had started to respect, the man she thought was beginning to see beyond the numbers, had vanished. In his place was the cold, ruthless monster the world knew him to be. With a heart shattered by the injustice of it all, Isabella turned and followed Marcus out of the office. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, a sound of finality sealing her fate. She was back in the cold, cast back into her old life, but now with the added weight of $250,000 that felt less like a salvation and more like blood money. The next morning, the atmosphere in the Thorne Industries boardroom was as sterile and cold as an operating theatre. Sunlight streamed through the panoramic windows, but it offered no warmth. Julian Thorne sat at the head of the long, polished table, his face set like granite. His team was assembled, including a triumphant Marcus Finch. Between Thorne and Lorenzo Vescovi sat a new interpreter, a severe-looking woman named Ms. Albright, sourced from the United Nations. She was reputed to be the best a master of simultaneous translation, precise and utterly devoid of personality. The final contracts, thick and imposing, were laid out on the table. This was meant to be a formality, a celebratory signing. Instead, it felt like a funeral. Miss Albright translated Thorne's opening pleasantries with robotic precision. Her voice was a monotone drone, stripping the words of any potential warmth. Vescovi listened, his expression impassive, but his eyes, sharp and perceptive, darted around the room. He noted Isabella's absence immediately. Through Miss Albright he spoke. "Mr. Thorne, all seems to be in order. However, I do not see the young woman Isabella." "Is she unwell?" Thorne's jaw tightened. "Ms. Rossi's role in these proceedings has concluded. Ms. Albright is more than qualified to facilitate our final signing. The translation was technically perfect, but it was a disaster. Isabella would have understood the nuance. She would have known that Vescovi wasn't just asking about her whereabouts. He was asking why the person who had become the heart of their communication was suddenly gone. He was asking why the trust they had built had been broken. Ms. Albright's sterile rendition made Thorne's reply sound dismissive and arrogant. A subtle coolness entered Vescovi's eyes. He nodded slowly, then began to speak at length in his Como dialect. He spoke of the final clauses, but his words were layered with metaphors about trust and partnership. He spoke of a boat builder who chooses his wood not just for its strength, but for its character, and how a single rotten plank added at the last minute can sink the entire vessel. Ms. Albright struggled. The dialect was too specific, the metaphors too culturally dense. She translated the literal words, rotten plank, sinking ship, but missed the entire point. Her translation came out as a confusing, almost insulting jumble. He is saying he has concerns about the integrity of the materials, Marcus Finch whispered to Thorne, utterly bewildered. Thorne knew it was going wrong. The rapport, the understanding that Isabella had so painstakingly built was gone. The room was once again a space of cultural and emotional disconnect. He was back where he started, only this time the stakes were higher, and the failure was entirely his own making. Vescovi, seeing the blank confusion on their faces, sighed. He switched to a more formal standard Italian, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. He felt he had been deceived. The brief, hopeful connection he had made with these Americans through the spirit of a girl from his own region had been a mirage. They were after all just merchants. He looked at Thorne, his gaze direct and piercing. He spoke a single clear sentence. Ms. Albright translated. He says, "This partnership lacks a soul." With that, Lorenzo Vescovi closed the portfolio in front of him. He pushed his chair back and stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and utterly final. "Signore, please," Thorne said, standing as well, a wave of cold panic washing over him. "There must be a misunderstanding." Vescovi shook his head. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Thorne," he said, and this time he spoke in heavily accented but perfectly clear English. The words shocked the room into silence. He had been capable of speaking English all along. The entire test, the entire charade, had been about something else entirely. "This was never about your money," Vescovi continued, his voice heavy with disappointment. "It was about finding a custodian for my family's work, a successor who understood that our legacy is woven with more than just silk. It is woven with stories, with honor, with respect. For a few days I thought you understood that, because you had the wisdom to listen to a young woman who did. But she is gone, and so the soul is gone." He turned to leave. "The deal is off." The words hit Thorne like a physical blow. It was over. He had lost. He had let his paranoia, stoked by a jealous subordinate, destroy the single greatest achievement of his career. He had trusted the wrong person. He had trusted Marcus, and he had destroyed Isabella. As Vescovi reached the boardroom door, it swung open. Isabella Rossi stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing the designer suit. She was in a simple dress, the kind of thing she would have worn on her day off. Her hair was not in a severe bun, but fell softly around her shoulders. She looked not like a corporate consultant, nor a waitress, but simply like herself. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her expression was one of fierce resolve. She had spent a sleepless night in her small Queen's apartment, the scene in Thorne's office playing over and over in her mind. She had been wronged, humiliated. Her first instinct was to take the money and disappear, to use it to heal her sister and forget this brutal world had ever touched her. But then she thought of her grandfather, a man whose legacy had been stolen, whose name had been erased. If she walked away now, she would be letting the same injustice happen all over again, not just to him, but to herself. She could not let them erase her story. She walked past the stunned guards and into the boardroom. She didn't look at Thorne. Her eyes were fixed on Lorenzo Vescovi. "Signore Vescovi." She said, her voice clear and strong, resonating in the silent room. She spoke in their dialect, the language of home. "May I speak to you not as an interpreter, but as the granddaughter of Giovanni Rossi?" Vescovi froze his hand on the doorknob. He turned slowly his face, a mask of shock and dawning comprehension. "Rossi. Giovanni Rossi." "Yes, Isabella," said, stepping further into the room. "My grandfather, the man who created the Fiore di Como and the Alba d'Oro patterns, the patterns that launched your father's company." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Vescovi. The dialect, the name, the vague stories of a craftsman. It all made sense now. Thorne watched, paralyzed. This was it. The sabotage Marcus had predicted. She had come to blow up the deal with the truth of their family's past. He had been right all along, but as he looked at her face, he saw no vengeance. He saw only a profound, heartbreaking sadness and a deep well of courage. "I did not come here for money or for revenge." Isabella continued, her voice trembling but unbroken as she faced Vescovi. "I came here to do a job, but I cannot leave with my family's story untold. Your father betrayed my grandfather. He built his success on my family's ruin. That is the truth. And before you walk out that door, I believe my grandfather, Giovanni Rossi, deserves for you to hear it and to acknowledge it." The room was silent, save for her voice. It was not an accusation meant to destroy. It was a simple, powerful plea for the truth, a plea for a 70-year-old ghost to finally be laid to rest. Lorenzo Vescovi's stoic facade crumbled. Staring at Isabella, he confessed in clear English for all to witness. "It is true," he admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of generations. He told of his father's deathbed confession, the profound shame of building an empire on the genius of his betrayed friend Giovanni Rossi. It was a debt, he explained, that his family had carried for over 50 years. As he listened, the cold calculus of Julian Thorne's world dissolved. He saw the human heart of the deal and the ugly reflection of his own ruthless ambition in the story of betrayal. He was overwhelmed with shame for how he had misjudged and accused Isabella, a woman of incredible integrity. This was a moment of reckoning, a chance to become a different man. Stepping forward, he made a stunning declaration. "That deal is dead." He then offered a new one, not an acquisition, but a partnership. Vescovi would remain chairman. A 25% stake in the newly formed Vescovi Rossi Textiles would be given to Isabella, who would join the board as the guardian of her grandfather's legacy. Giovanni Rossi's name and contributions would be officially and publicly restored to the company's history. Seeing a man truly redeemed, Vescovi extended his hand. "We have a deal." Thorne shook it, then coldly dismissed Marcus Finch. Weeks later, the three partners, Thorne, Vescovi, and Isabella, stood on a balcony overlooking Lake Como. For Vescovi, it was atonement. For Thorne, it was redemption. And for Isabella, it was justice, her family's honor reclaimed, and a legacy finally reborn. So $1 billion impasse, a furious CEO, and a silent waitress. Who would have thought the key to unlocking a business empire wasn't in a balance sheet, but in a forgotten dialect spoken from the heart? Isabella Rossi's journey from serving tables to sitting at the head of one reminds us that our greatest assets are often the parts of ourselves we think the world has forgotten. Her courage didn't just change her own life. It redeemed a family's painful past and transformed a ruthless billionaire into a leader who understood the true meaning of value. It proves that sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one with the most powerful thing to say. If this story of unexpected triumph and profound redemption moved you, show your support by hitting that like button, share it with someone who believes in the power of second chances, and be sure to subscribe for more true-to-life stories that inspire. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. What hidden talent do you have that might just change the world?